Hello and welcome. This is Tim with Empowered Change, and in today's episode of Stories and Lessons, I'm going to tell you a story about my baby brother. It's kind of a special day while I record this. It's his birthday, so I thought, what better way of celebrating my little brother's birthday than to tell embarrassing stories about our childhood and our adult life. So first, it's important for you to know a little bit more about my childhood, how I grew up, and how my baby brother grew up. So there's just the two of us. I'm 4.5 years older than him. Sean and I weren't violent with each other with purpose. We horsed around a good bit, and if anything, I got hurt a lot by Sean. There were 2 separate occasions where he gashed open my forehead, one with a matchbox car, and the other time with a broken motorcycle windshield while we were horsing around in the backyard. Neither of those occasions were we in a screaming match or a fight or any kind of violent altercation. We were just playing around without supervision. I do still have a pretty good scar, though, from both of those. I don't know to this day how years apart my brother managed to hit me in the exact same spot on 2 different occasions, but I guess that's just the magic of brotherhood. Like I said, we never really were violent. There was one occasion where I beat up my baby brother. We were wrestling around. I think I was 11 to 13, somewhere in there. And Sean couldn't win, got kind of frustrated that we were wrestling, and kicked me right in the nuts. And when he did it, he knew that it was bad. He got up and ran and went and hid in the park. I laid there for what felt like forever, just trying to calm down. But all I saw was red, and it hurt so bad. And for any of you who have been kicked in the nuts, know it's a building pain. It doesn't get better. It's the kind of thing that happens, and then you wait, and it just gets worse and worse. And finally, I can't take it anymore. I get up and I chase him down and I beat the tar out of him. And then I get up and I went home and ran to my room and cried because I'd hurt my baby brother. Sean came home sometime later, his face all puffed up, the beginnings of a black eye happening, and he goes to my mother. And she immediately sees him and like, "What the hell happened to you? Are you okay?" And he's snuffling and crying. He's like, Tim beat me up. And she immediately stops, looks at him, and says, "What did you do?" Because my mother knew me. And Sean told her he had kicked me in the nuts, and she spanked him, yelling about wanting grandkids. That was the one and only time that I remember ever putting pain to my brother. But for some reason growing up, Sean always deferred to me on the physical. He'd take the piss out of me pretty regular. He was a prankster. And he had a mean set of social pranks that he would play on me, not the least of which, unsurprisingly, right after that beating he took from me, he went and told the neighborhood bullies he walked in on me giving a Hummer to my best friend. That was fun. That was the kind of thing Sean would pull. He was a monster of a kid. He was all over the place, but violence wasn't really part of our expression to each other. But for whatever reason, Sean deferred to me. If I did any kind of threat to him, if he was doing something I didn't like, and, I'm going to beat you up if you don't stop doing whatever you're doing, he generally would. He would listen to me. Now, I think that was primarily because we were really close as kids. I was the one that Sean would crawl into bed with if he had a nightmare. I would get defensive of him. He was the only thing as a kid that I would get violent over. Now, to understand who the two of us were growing up, I was always a little taller than my peers. I never really remember a moment of not being the tallest kid in my grade, but I was scrawny. I was super thin. And somehow or another, I got it in my head that I was bigger than the other kids and therefore didn't have a right to kind of violently defend myself. So I got bullied a lot just for being kind of a tall, awkward kid that wouldn't fight back. Sean is a monster of a human being. Currently, he's 6'7" and over 250 pounds. Growing up, it wasn't uncommon for people to think my brother was 3 years older than he was because he was so big. And that led most people, myself included sometimes, to think of Sean as slow. Imagine, if you will, now as an adult, looking at a kid that you think is 10 years old, acting like a 6-year-old and talking like a 6-year-old, and what you might think of that kid. That was my brother. The only time we were ever in school together, because our age difference was so broad, was elementary school. Where we grew up, it was kindergarten through 6th grade. And so Sean started kindergarten when I was in the 4th grade. And there was a kid that was a grade ahead of me and bullied me all the way through elementary school. And one day on the way home, walking home, he decided that he was going to bully my little brother a little bit. And I really don't remember what happened. I just remember coming to and kind of having him by the throat against a tree, telling him that if he ever laid hands on my brother again, that I'd hurt him. And it was weird. A week later, he went right back to bullying me. We never talked about him doing anything to Sean, and he never touched Sean again. Kids are weird. But that was how we were together. I was the older brother. I did my best to protect him, and he deferred to me physically. So by the time we get to middle school, our elementary school wasn't too bad. It was all local kids we grew up around, kids we played in the neighborhood with. But when we got to middle school, we left kind of the suburban bubble we were in and went off, and more kids from other places were bussed in. And at that point, we were one of the few sets of white kids around at the school we were at, and the bullying got intense. I remember numerous occasions of getting jumped by other kids, of curling in a ball while 3 or 4 kids pounded on me. I even remember at one point, I'm pretty sure I had a cracked rib or something because it hurt to breathe for a few weeks after one of the beatings I took. And again, in large part, that was because I still wouldn't fight back. I didn't find myself valuable enough to fight, and realistically, what are most people gonna do when 4 people decide to put the hurt on you? Sean's experience in middle school was very different from mine. I remember he had started middle school, I was finishing up high school, and Sean came home, and it's the last week of school. And the last week of school in a violent school is when the real violence kind of takes place. Kids think that there isn't going to be consequences because what are they going to do? Suspend me the last week of school? So Sean comes home, and I'm like, hey man, how was your day? And he's like, oh, it's all right. A few kids tried to jump me, but otherwise it was okay. And I'm immediately re-engaged. I'm like, who did what to you now? Where are they at? Who are these kids? And he's like, man, it's fine. They ran away. Years later, I would ask my brother, how the heck do you fight 4 or 5 people? And he scoffs and he looks at me. He's like, man, you don't fight 4 or 5 people. You wait for the first one to get to you, you pick them up, and you throw them at 1 or 2 of the others, and they usually run away. That was my brother. Sean grew up as kind of this gentle giant. He knew how big he was. He never really wanted to hurt anybody. He got picked on a lot because everybody thought he was slow, and was generally a funny, sweet kid. But when he got to middle school, he got tired of taking anybody's crap, and he realized how much bigger he was than anybody else. And to his credit, Sean has never started a fight, but I fully believe he's finished quite a few. I think in middle school and even into some of the high school, he was the mountain to climb, and no one ever topped him. So that leads us to where we were as me as a teen and an adolescent, and him kind of coming into his own as teens. Our home, by the time Sean was an adolescent and I was a teenager, was pretty chaotic. The partying had caught up to my parents. My mother was really unstable. And at that point, anything we could do to be out of the house was really where my dad wanted us. Mostly for his own sanity, so he could kind of try to keep a rein on things at home, but also just to have some quiet when he could get it. So he made me take my brother everywhere with me. And I don't overstate everywhere. My brother has gone on more dates with me than any girlfriend I ever had in high school. I literally drug my brother everywhere I went. He was like my shadow for a long time. And through all that, he was generally quiet and just kind of awkward. He just kind of hung out and was around. And at the time, I had this picture in my mind of my brother as this quiet, awkward kid. So when I moved away at 19, that was who I thought my brother was. This quiet kid who could physically take care of himself, but wasn't socially apt in any way. Looking back on it, of course he wasn't. He was hanging out at 12 with 16-year-olds. Who wouldn't be awkward? Who wouldn't be quiet, right? He really didn't get to come into his own socially from what I could see until I moved away. And it was interesting how I came to the realization that my brother was going to be the witty, hilarious man that I love today. I'd moved away. It'd been about a year. And over that time, Sean still ran with a lot of my friends and his own crew. He was developing out his own social networks in high school. And I'm 20 years old, and I call him to check in because I'm going to come home for Thanksgiving. And he immediately picks up the phone and he's like, "Hey, I think I can take you, you little bitch." And I immediately feel my sphincter tighten because I know he's figured it out. Because of course he can take me. All the way through adolescence and my teen years, Sean deferred to me that way. Sean acted in accordance with what I think most people do with their big brother. You know, "Oh, I don't want to take a beating." Whatever you say, man. But I'm only 20 years old, and my masculinity at this point is still pretty fragile. And I can't just admit that my brother, who at this point is 6'4" and 220, to my 6'1" and 180, can take me in a fight. And at this point, I'd started playing rugby and been pretty big into the mosh pit scene, but I knew in my mind there was no way I could take my brother. But instead of just admitting that, I go, "Yeah, whatever, man. We'll see what happens when I get home." Click, and hang up the phone. And this is about 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. And the whole time leading up to the trip, I'm just like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? And the plan I come up with is that I'm going to get home and I'm going to try to surprise him. It's my only chance. I need surprise. I know I can't take him in a stand-up fight, so I've got to try to catch my moment. And maybe I've got a chance to kind of keep my status as the big brother in our relationship. So sure enough, a buddy of mine comes, picks me up from the airport. We pull up to my house, and I look around the side of the house, and Sean is playing guitar on the side of the house. And I'm like, oh, perfect. He doesn't know I'm here. He's going to try to take care of that guitar if I start something. This is my shot. No guitars were hurt in the making of this story. So in my mind, I was going to run up the side of the house, vault the fence, and spear tackle him while he fumbles with the guitar, and I'm going to get on top of him, and I'm going to hold him down and establish physical dominance over my baby brother. That was how it went in my mind. What actually happened is I drop my bags, I go running up the side of the house, and I go to vault the fence to spear tackle Sean, and this is when the plan came apart. My foot caught the fence. So rather than this smooth, graceful spear tackle, my eyes go really big. I kind of grab his shoulder as I trip and fall and can drag him down to the ground with me. I don't really know what happened between my foot getting caught on the fence and me getting Sean on the ground with me, but we roll around on the ground for a little bit and I find myself on top of him, holding one of his arms and holding him down, and him struggling. And I notice that he's not struggling very hard. In fact, when I take a look, he's literally just laying on one of his arms. And he's got his other arm up, and he's like, you got me. Get off me, you got me. Oh, you got me. And I get up, and I look around, and my buddy watched this whole thing. And some of Sean's friends are in the yard. And I can't just, in that moment, acknowledge that my brother let me win. Because again, I'm only 20 years old. My masculinity is still pretty fragile. And I get up and I'm like, that's right, you little bitch. You remember that. I go inside. The next morning, I see Sean as he's getting out of the shower, and he's got a towel on, but that's all he's wearing. And I look at him, and I was like, hey, man, thanks for letting me feel like the big brother yesterday. And Sean went beet red from his hairline all the way down to the towel, and he shuffles his feet, and he looks at the ground, and he's like, man, I didn't think you noticed. And it was at that moment that I kind of realized that my baby brother was growing up. And that on some level, he was more of a man than I am. He let me win to let me feel like the big brother because he knew how important that role was to me. And that set up the rest of the trip. I still went out to go see all my friends. And of course, my brother was there with me. He'd always been there with me. And for the first time, I kept my mouth shut and just watched my brother. Turns out Sean wasn't quiet. I was just real loud. Where was Sean going to have space to talk with me around? All of a sudden, that awkward, goofy, fat kid that I grew up with was this tall, hilarious guy that was making a table full of my friends laugh. It was in that time and in that trip that I realized that nothing with my brother was ever going to be the same, and nothing was ever going to change the way I felt about him. To this day, if Sean tells me somebody bothers him, I click back into some 16-year-old idiot that's going to go punch somebody. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. And to this day, Sean lets me feel like the big brother. Because I'll always be his big brother, and he'll always be my baby brother. So the lesson here that's going to be important for me, and I think for a lot of us, is people who care about you and that you care about fill roles in your life. And it's important to acknowledge what the role is, but don't let that role trap who you think that person is. My brother does not need me to take care of him. My brother loves me because I try. I love that he lets me. But I don't worry about him anymore. And since I stopped worrying about him, all of a sudden we started to have real conversations like men. I hope you liked the story today. It's a little lighter-hearted than some of the other stories, but I think just as poignant. I hope that in hearing this story, it helped you see some people different in your life and helps you recognize what you do for them and what they do for you. This is Tim with Empowered Change. Thanks for listening.